Yeah, I mean, I think another analogy I liked was that it's kind of like the pyramids of Egypt. Mm-hmm. So we look at them and you think that, wow, that's an enormous construction engineering project, given the technology they had at the time. It must take like 100 years to build one of these things, right? And they've got lots of them. And so Bitcoin is a kind of digital modern day version of this, which is we're making this single pyramid and it's huge and we keep building on top, so it's getting bigger, and stuff that's buried at the bottom is not getting out of there.
Right.
And so it does have this kind of awe-inspiring digital phenomenon that it's the biggest computation ever done.
Yeah.
Right. And it just keeps getting bigger and the computation is growing faster.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's wolfnyc, WOLFNYC.com.
Adam Bax, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Great to have you here. Second time you've been on the show. I know you appeared once with Jason Lowry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, second time.
A solo episode though. Glad to be doing it in person. We're here at Riga, the Bitcoin Baltic Honey Badger Conference, I think is the name of it. Sitting in this interrogation room turned podcast studio. So, by way of quick introduction, you're the CEO and co-founder of Blockstream, and you recently were getting a lot of attention for a bet you made, betting that I think Bitcoin breaks $100,000 USD price point before the next halving, which is scheduled or approximately going to be end of March 2024?
Yeah, April, March 2024.
Yeah. So what's going on there? Why the bet, and who's the bet with, and what's the motivation for it?
So we were just, there was just some Twitter discussion about, where Bitcoin price is going, when, and I, just looking at sort of price trajectory in history between halvings, we're at an unusual point where Bitcoin is lower than it would be in terms of, comparisons between 2 cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is because of a lot of external factors, the COVID, the quantitative easing, supply chain disruption, Ukraine war impact on power costs, and a number of DeFi failures and altcoin failures, and the sort of contagion between leverage between different kind of crypto hedge funds like Three Arrows Capital and companies that ended up doing unsecured lending between themselves. So it caused a lot of failure. And the mainstream media's understanding of the space is simplified. So they'll just take one bit of bad news, like some kind of crypto hedge fund fails, and they'll translate that into Bitcoin has a problem. It's not really related, but nevertheless the market reacts because the average person listens to the mainstream media who typically has a confused viewpoint. So in any case, I would say absolutely, that string of bad news, which is kind of, to my view, misunderstood and overplayed in terms of its impact on Bitcoin price. Bitcoin should be at a higher level now. And so, people are, when they're expecting it, they're sort of thinking, well, the bull market is done for this cycle, and now we wait until after the halving. Historically, the price has picked up. People assume because of the effect of the halving, the amount of new coins coming on the market per day is cut in half, and therefore supply is restricted. If the demand stays the same, it will throw things off the balance and push the price up, and that has tended to have an effect 6 to 9 months after the halving. So people are kind of looking at that, and I'm saying, well, we should already be over 100,000 apart from all this drama. So, I think there's a reasonable expectation that we could get to 100,000 before the halving and maybe go a lot higher after that. So it was that discussion, and somebody, chimed in on Twitter saying, well, let's bet on it. So I said, okay, how much would you like to bet? And he said 1 million sats. So I said, fine, done. And so we set the time limit at the halving itself.
So it is the halving, or is the end of March, or?
So initially it was like end of March, but I was like, well, no, actually I meant the halving. Can we change it to the halving? That was the kind of point of the discussion. Like,
got it. And so I've thought about this too, because typically, doesn't Bitcoin usually get back to its prior all-time high price around the halving? And then it peaks, like you said, 6 to 9 months after the halving is kind of the historic trend.
Yeah, something like that. But I mean, I think, also historically, Bitcoin, before 2021 had never gone below the 200-week moving average. And during the COVID periods, the price went below that, which is kind of, news, and it's even slightly below it now. And so I'd say that we're out of the normal range due to, a compounding bunch of factors affecting price. Yeah.
Would you expect, I've thought about this for a while too, that if that pattern persists, that the halving sort of demarcates a bull run, like 6 to 9 months in advance, if that pattern continues to repeat, don't people just start front running that at some point, and that becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's some debate about the efficient market hypothesis and whether the halving should be priced in. And I think one argument for why it might not be priced in is the volatility. So one argument, my argument is, well, look, all of the Bitcoin money, i.e. the US dollar liquidity of people interested in Bitcoin, it's already deployed. People tend to get very all in, right? So they don't have spare dollars to, buy more and sell them again after a price increase. They don't really want to take leverage because it's dangerous. So they don't have the capacity to take this. And so the only people who could take it are outside money, who don't really know or care about Bitcoin, but could see a kind of arbitrage opportunity. And firstly, Bitcoin is probably pretty esoteric to them. But secondly, it's, if you accept this trend, which they may be skeptical of, you've got to absorb a lot of volatility. Right, so if you see something that has 80% per year volatility, and you take an arbitrage, that's a really high risk perception. So for Bitcoiners, it's okay because you're like, oh, it'll be fine in the long term. But I think it's very hard for an outsider to take. Whereas in a normal kind of pricing in scenario, let's say a government announces they're going to slash the tax on rental property for landlords renting properties. That's going to have an immediate effect on the property market because it's a very stable, relatively stable market. You've got a date, you can calculate the economic effect on the profitability. It will be priced
as low vol.
Maybe priced in the next day, right?
Yeah.
The world.
Yeah.
You've also got sort of, analysts and some professional money managers that will figure out and put a lot of money on what they think is the correct pricing. And that kind of investor is missing from the Bitcoin space mostly in today.
Yeah, so maybe over time we'd start to see that.
Yeah, another argument, which is why a lot of people have problems with stock to flow, is that the percentage change of the halving is smaller each time.
Yes,
as compared to the total coins in circulation, and so you say, well, it's getting so small. How could it possibly make a difference?
Right.
And I think the argument for how it could make a difference, despite that, is that you've got this hodl wave phenomena where as people, experience a cycle or two in Bitcoin, they start to adapt their behavior to being more dollar cost average, buy and hold, don't trade. And so the number of coins that are immobile is also creeping up, right? So it means that the percentage change is still relevant compared to the not cold stored Bitcoin. And another objection people have is the amount of coins per day or per year produced is small relative to the daily volume traded.
Right.
But I would say most of the daily volume traded is speculative. It's like a zero-sum game of people speculating, right? So I'd say that's largely irrelevant for price formation. Yeah. That's just gives you liquidity if you need to buy or sell, right? And so what is relevant for price formation is people who are taking bold positions, like buying Bitcoin and holding it for long term. Mm-hmm. So they come into the market, they buy Bitcoin, they take it off the market. And so if you look at that activity, proportion of market action that is dollar cost averaging, you compare that to, the halving effect, then it's significant again. So from our point of view, it could perpetuate because as each 4 years passes, more coins got taken off the market as people adapt to dollar cost averaging. So maybe it can persist to have an effect.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is that an actual percentage of the coins that are being traded versus just a percentage of the total? Because that's less relevant to it. That makes sense. You tweeted recently too that you expected the difficulty adjustment to hit 1 Zeta Hash, which is a 1 followed by 21 zeros, perhaps as early as Q4 2024. What is that based on, and what does that mean for Bitcoin? Obviously, Bitcoin's already, I think, the most secure computing network in the world. This would be taking it to another level, so to speak.
Yeah, it's just based on looking at the last year's hash rate increase, and of course, new, more efficient miners are coming online all the time, like being manufactured, and people are retiring older generation miners. So the amount of megawatts deployed may not go up as much because the new miners are more efficient, but nevertheless, it's it's currently around 400 exahash, so it's sort of 40% of the way there. So I just thought it was, a factor of 1,000 is an interesting kind of event, right? The last time we crossed that was going to the 1 exahash, which is a long time ago now. So I was kind of curious, well, when actually would the Zeta Hash line be crossed? And it's, it's such an unusual ISO prefix that people have not heard of Zetas, right? So I was like, well, now we have to add that to a lexicon. Like, what is a Zeta? How many zeros is that, right? And because in physics and stuff like this, kind of numbers don't usually come about, right? So yeah, it looks like, with the hash rate increase, it depends, of course, on the price appreciation and things like that as to how fast hash rate grows. At the moment, it's growing faster than it otherwise would because people bought a lot of miners in the 2021, 2022 period, and they have excess inventory, which they haven't been able to get online yet. Because there was, in 2021, there was a shortage of miners, so people bid up the price. I think in 2022, it came to be a surplus of, a shortage of places to host miners.
Right.
And so, there's excess inventory, people who've already bought it, it will make money if you can get it online. So they're obviously going to put it online. And, I think that the Bitcoin revenue has increased a lot this year. Like the hash rate is up 50%, from year to date, like from January. And the prices are up 70 to 80%. So, the mining revenue is up 25, 30%. And the mining activity is dominated by input costs, power and operation. So if your revenue goes up 20 to 30%, and your input costs are, 80, 90% of the revenue, your profitability could be up by, a big factor, like 2 or 3 times potentially. So I would say already mining is a lot more profitable than it was in December last year, but still not as profitable as during 2021, as the bull market kicked in and the price went up and the profitability went up a lot faster than manufacturers could make new miners to put online.
This dovetails nicely into something you brought up on the panel yesterday that I thought was interesting. We often describe the halving dynamic that, less supply coming onto the market, holding demand constant, puts upward pressure on price. But you made this further point that as Bitcoin's price rises, Bitcoin miners tend to become less inclined to sell their Bitcoin to cover their operating cost, right? Which drives Bitcoin's price even higher. So there's another one of these self-reinforcing dynamics at play. Can you expand a bit on that? Like, so what extent is that just something you've seen miners doing, or is this something? Do you think they're then speculating on further price appreciation in Bitcoin? That's why they keep more of it on their balance sheet, or and does that dynamic unwind, right, when the market starts to go the other direction?
Yeah, it does unwind. So basically, there are individuals with, garage of miners or a small warehouse and private companies doing prop mining. So i.e. buying the miners, mining the Bitcoin and trying to keep as many as they can, and public market companies as well. And you can, like at least with the public ones, you can look at their quarterly reports and they'll disclose, how many Bitcoin they have in inventory, how much cash, how much hash rate they have online, that kind of thing. So you can watch the effect, right? And so generally they tend to want to keep as many Bitcoin as they can, right? But in a bear market, the profitability drops. So the percentage of Bitcoins they mine that they have to sell to cover the power or operating costs goes up. And so, maybe in a bear market, they have to sell 75% of the coins and they're going to keep a quarter. And in a bull market, maybe they can keep 75%. And so that means that as, if the price starts to go up faster than people can get miners online, they will be able to keep more of the coins. And the fact that then, that takes another seller off the market, which is kind of like a halving, right? So that will also, and it could be significant. There's a lot of coins mined, right? So maybe that could be more significant than a halving even, right? So it is another driver of kind of big Bitcoin macro volatility. The price rising kind of has a few effects that cause it to rise further. It's certainly, Bitcoin is a bit of a gifting good where, if it goes up, people like it more. Right. So, it gets in the news, people hear Bitcoin's going up, they buy it. Lots of people are momentum traders. Apparently institutions like to buy asset classes that have a bigger pool of liquidity. So if it's bigger, then they say, we could trade that. If it's too small, they think they can't. So there are like multiple things that cause people to chase momentum, but the miners actually have a kind of direct economic reason.
And then when that price, so say we get a bull market peak and Bitcoin's price starts to reverse, the miners then start to liquidate that inventory they've accumulated, and does that then suppress price down more quickly? Like, is there a flip side to that dynamic?
Yeah, there is, and actually leverage makes it worse too. So, of course, as the, if they've got into a bull market where they're able to keep 75% of the coins, and you get another pullback, maybe they get into the position where they have to sell 70% of the coins again. And so now they're selling more daily. But what's worse is the Bitcoin ecosystem is generally undercapitalized. So, a company like Tesla or Ford or Sony, anybody making physical goods, they have very deep pools of liquidity where they can raise corporate bonds to, in a Bitcoin example, build miners, build power infrastructure, build inventory, and Bitcoin doesn't have that. And so, they could, when people see a gap in the market that, mining has become very profitable and they don't have the cash liquidity, they'll borrow it. And they don't like selling Bitcoin, so they borrow it against Bitcoin at high interest rates because it's a novel market, or they borrow it against the ASICs themselves and things like that. And so the problem then is in a bear market scenario, not only do they have to sell more of the coins they're mining, but they might have to sell coins they mined before, like inventory, to pay off a loan or something, right? Because they made a bet, which was that they could borrow against Bitcoin to expand their mining and end up with more Bitcoin. But they knew they would eventually have to pay off a loan. They just hoped that was at a higher price. So if it turns out to be a lower price, now they will sell a big chunk of Bitcoin. You saw some miners do that. You can see their inventories dropped. So I think, that was probably part of the late last year pullback, is people selling, public mining companies and private ones selling thousands of Bitcoin in a period of time.
Yeah, and some lenders taking possession of the miners as well, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to think about. There's so many of these self-reinforcing dynamics with Bitcoin because the supply just is fixed, it doesn't change. So sort of drives speculation, but also you're not getting any relief for these market movements through the supply as with other commodities.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you think about like versus gold is quite interesting to make an analogy with, because while people say Bitcoin is digital gold and it has a lot of similarities, in a gold bull market, the gold miners will, ramp their gold production up. And they'll work shifts, 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. Whereas in a sideways market, they might just work in a day, right? Or they'll have a more expensive mine, but it's not worth getting rid, like abandoning, but it's only profitable at a certain price, and they'll reopen it, right? So there is some adaptation on the upside, which can increase the supply, which will sort of damp the bull market, and the same the other way. If the price is down, they'll slow down the production. Bitcoin never slows; it just get it.
Right. That's super interesting.
Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, iCoin Technology. iCoin has just released a sleek new hardware wallet. It looks like a mini iPhone, a little touch screen and camera on it. The device has no Wi-Fi, no cellular connection, no GPS. It's a strictly physically cold hardware wallet. Like I said, it's got a high-res 3-inch touchscreen. It's got a camera for air gapping the wallet. It's got optional Bluetooth compatibility. And it's really a brand new UI, UX experience for a hardware wallet, making it very accessible, easy to use, not intimidating. And as we always talk about on this show, the only way you can truly own your Bitcoin is by having it in self-custody. So you need a device like iCoin Wallet to truly own your Bitcoin. Go to iCointechnology.com today and use promo code Bitcoin23 for 30% off of this new sleek hardware wallet.
Okay, you tweeted this recently too. This was a retweet actually talking about how Bitcoin fixes the duck curve, which is a mismatch between periods of peak energy demand and periods of peak renewable energy production. We just did an episode recently on how Bitcoin helps actually stabilize energy grids. How do you, this is such a misunderstood point. Like typically the narrative on Bitcoin energy is Bitcoin wastes energy or consumes too much energy. Whereas I think the truth is actually kind of the opposite, right? It's stabilizing power grids and solving these market dislocations. How do you approach this topic for normies? I mean, you're trying to unpack kind of Bitcoin meeting energy and what the benefits are.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because I think the energy market, we come at it from a Bitcoin perspective, so we're learning about energy markets, but it's its own specialized field that the average person or even the average savvy investor doesn't necessarily know much about. It's a niche market, but effectively it turns out that there are a number of factors that affect the energy market. One is most energy generation is built to overcapacity because they have to build for peak demand, which means that typically, in a given region, half of the power is like either pay somebody to get rid of it because they can't turn the power plant off quickly enough, or they just waste it. They don't use the capacity they have. And so, the concept there's a shortage of power is not really true. It's just, it doesn't match demand, and there's lots of it thrown away. And the other thing is it's very hard to transport it. And so, there's lots of stranded energy. So in China particularly, they did these kind of big state planning efforts where they built a hydro dam thinking they were going to build a town in the next 50 years, and then that didn't happen, right? So there's like gigawatts of power stranded in the mountains. And there are countries that have massive oversupply. So actually just the Quebec province of Canada has a lot of hydropower, and it has enough unused hydropower from existing built dams to power the entire Bitcoin network. But the power company is a crown corporation, so it's a government corporation, and they have some kind of restrictions on supply of power to new Bitcoin mining projects, which is the wrong way around. I think countries like El Salvador, Oman have taken a more enlightened view, which is that originally we had the gold as a global standard, and then with the discovery of petroleum and oil and black gold, and so that countries with that natural resource seized the opportunity and were able to kind of transform their prominence in the world. And so I think there's an opportunity for that with digital gold, which is a natural resource, is abundant, cheap power. And so, countries that seize that opportunity can, and hold on to it and go for it, for a decade or two, could really change things for themselves. I think there's a real prospect that, if El Salvador, proceeds with this kind of $1 billion state mining project, and if you look at, Bitcoin price history, how many Bitcoin they could mine, within a decade, they could potentially change their kind of per capita wealth to be on par with a major European country from being an emerging market country. So it's really possible for countries that seize on a new wave, a new innovation in a transition period in a global sense, can change things for themselves. But also it's possible for, major developed countries to not act very enlightened and throw away an opportunity. And unlike gold, unused power doesn't stay in the ground, it's thrown away, right?
Right.
So it's not like you can go back and get a benefit from it.
Yeah.
And it gets harder to mine over time. So it's really something where you have to act in the moment.
Yeah. It's a great point. It seems like there's so much money being left on the table, right? Where energy is being curtailed or excess capacity is not being used.
Well, I think the other point is, historically, for hundreds of years, access to power capacity is strongly correlated with the wealth of nations.
Yes.
And, it's true at any point in time, and it's true over time. And that stretches through the Industrial Revolution, and before gasoline, and into, power, nuclear power. And so I think we should have every reason to suppose that will continue in the future. And so, governments have the sort of policy mandate to look at, renewable energy and things like that. But ultimately, the future is going to need more power, and policy kind of desires don't translate into construction of power generation. And so the way, so really you just need to look at ways to finance power. And I think the Bitcoin mining machine is a financial model that can fund power infrastructure. So I think ultimately, Bitcoin could end up being a solution in building lots and lots of power infrastructure, which ends up being used in the future.
Yeah.
For general use.
Right. Yeah. So just this almost global incentive program to just build out more capacity.
Yeah.
Because you can monetize it more quickly, right?
Right.
Also, you can, what was the other point that someone made, that a lot of these stations will be built, but they're not actually tapped into the grid, for instance, or have a dislocation in when they can actually start selling into the grid, or now you could just start mining Bitcoin immediately, right, to bootstrap some of the development costs.
For sure, yeah. It's actually a very nice match, because if you think about the hypothetical of building, a hydro plant or a solar field or a wind farm or some kind of combination for a new region that you're expecting people to move there, an industrial park to get built. You build the power plant, and chances are there's no use for the first year because grid bureaucracy connecting you to it, and then afterwards maybe it ramps up slowly for 5 years, if it even happens on schedule, right? The demand, and so it makes it quite hard to figure out when you're going to repay it.
Yeah,
and it makes it more challenging to raise financing. Whereas Bitcoin says, Bitcoin is basically pledging to buy all unused power on day one, whether it's grid connected or not, and absorb all unused power as you grow to term. So it's much easier to make a profitable business cases with that buyer standing by.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. See, we typically say energy buyer of last resort, but in that case, it's like energy buyer of first resort. All right, just they're ready to buy on day one. So, okay, you recently tweeted. This is a good one. While mined Bitcoin aren't visual like a Picasso, they are unique like a snowflake under microscope. The leading zeros are aesthetically pleasing. The statistical improbability, the thermodynamic cost of finding them. It's like computational art, a digital, unique, rare diamond to marvel at, unquote.
Yeah.
One of your more philosophical tweets, which I really enjoyed. I gave a talk here yesterday in Riga, actually, and I was going into this whole thing about Bitcoin is right. And when you get into the three approaches I took to that was Bitcoin is right in the sense of the word right, like it's true and correct. It's a indisputable, unalterable record-keeping system, so it's always correct, almost by definition. I also said it's right in the sense of a private property right. It's probably the strongest form of property humans have ever had. And then it's also right in the sense that, to the extent stealing is wrong, then Bitcoin is right because it makes stealing more difficult, basically. And so kind of like a morally righteous tool, one might say. Which is that's a bit of a murky point for me because you consider the tools typically to be amoral, yet somehow, printing money is bad and wrong in all these ways. So if Bitcoin is money we can't print, then it's sort of right in that way. I don't know, so kind of wrestling with that one. But anyways, when you get into the etymology of the word right, you find this Proto-Indo-European word, actually, I'm sorry, it's a Sanskrit word, Rita, R-T-A, and it's where we get words like arithmetic, aristocrat, art, rhetoric, worth, ritual. So there's like this deep connection with kind of like rightness, beauty, order, and things like art. And so when you describe Bitcoin as art, I think that's fascinating. I just want to, what is it that's so valuable about art, first of all? I'm often mystified that people go to see the Mona Lisa, right? It's just like oil on a canvas, yet it's priceless, right? Like money can't even buy the thing. What is it about art? What's it doing for us? And then is Bitcoin art? And is it providing a similar feature?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not I can appreciate the aesthetics of art, but I'm not somebody that has ever spent a significant amount of money on art. But as I understand it, there's a history of art patronage where wealthy people would donate to an artist because they like the works they're producing and think it makes a better environment and, help improves people's enjoyment. But so I guess the presumably what drives that kind of art when it's resold is scarcity and authenticity kind of thing, right? And so those famous Renaissance painters, the art pieces are generally sold and have a huge price appreciation after the person's deceased because they know that's scarce, right?
Right.
Plus, it's they can do a very good job of authenticity testing it.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of uniqueness. And I think, of course, with Bitcoin, we consider it's de facto fungible, and that's an extremely desirable property for money. But even though you don't really look at it, and it's a mathematical thing, there is uniqueness in each mined block. And so, I was thinking you could almost visualize it, right? So, there's some hash in there that led to leading zeros. And of course, trillions of them were discarded until this was found, right? And so, a loose analogy is like maybe diamonds or something. So I think there's, it's basically formed when there's extremely high pressure to create them. They're relatively rare because of the conditions or something, but they're sort of still relatively unique patterns, right? And so Bitcoin technically also has this uniqueness of the block that mined it. And of course, actually, people tend to think of older blocks as like more mysterious or interesting because there's less known about their early history. But actually, the more recent ones have a lot more work involved. So in terms of the sheer impressiveness of the amount of computation that went into creating that, actually the most recent ones are the most impressive. And it's a kind of convention that we treat, old ones that were, by today's standard, extremely cheap to mine as financially equivalent to the expensive to mine ones. So yeah, I mean, so I was thinking it could be interesting, and this was a concept going back to kind of the fingerprints or checksums. So some sort of secure communications software shows you a checksum that you can confirm that you're talking to the right person. Like in Signal, there's a checksum. In PGP, there's a checksum. And going back many years ago, one of the cypherpunks had proposed transforming the checksum using some kind of deterministic algorithm into like a snowflake pattern, just so that it would be easier to visually look at it and see if it's the same, rather than, like reading hexadecimal digits and like trying to compare if this massive string of numbers is the same. So it occurred to me that, with the enormous work that goes into creating a block with so many leading zeros, there might be, somebody creative, like mathematically and programming and art, a way to, transform that into something visual that preserves, a visual inspection of the number of zeros.
Yeah, I wonder about this too, with like just art, the aesthetic value of art, giving people like a window into the transcendent, perhaps something that, like, it's hard to get into words, right? What beauty is. We see it in nature, we see it in humans, we see it in different forms of artwork, but it seems like art is trying to capture that moment, capture that beauty. That is, I don't know, like the raw experience of beauty itself in a way. And I don't know what it is about Bitcoin, but there's definitely something transcendent about it. Like, it's almost transcendent by definition, right? No one can change or alter it. And so it transcends our control or politics, at least. So I wonder if that plays into it at all. Like, to just see this marvel working and we can't really do anything about it. Like, it just TikTok next block. Kind of makes it like an engineering masterpiece or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think another analogy I liked was that it's kind of like the pyramids of Egypt. So we look at them and you think that, wow, that's an enormous construction engineering project, given the technology they had at the time. It must take like 100 years to build one of these things, right? And they've got lots of them. And so Bitcoin is a kind of digital modern day version of this, which is we're making this single pyramid, and it's huge, and we keep building on top, so it's getting bigger, and stuff that's buried at the bottom is not getting out of there.
Right.
And so it does have this kind of awe-inspiring digital phenomenon that it's the biggest computation ever done.
Yeah.
Right. And it just keeps getting bigger, and the computation is growing faster.
Yeah. No, it's a good analogy, but then, as you said earlier, the blocks are more computationally expensive. The more recent blocks are more computationally expensive. So it's kind of like, if you're using that pyramid analogy, the blocks are getting bigger as we go up the pyramid, right? Almost like maybe like an inverse pyramid or something.
Well, I mean, I guess it's growing bigger, faster, or something. Like there's more weight putting.
Yeah. Yeah, or the blocks are denser or something. But
yeah,
that's unusual, right? Because most physical structures would be the opposite, right? You'd have the heavier,
right,
more foundational materials at the bottom and the lighter stuff up top. But that's interesting. Bitcoin's growing in that sort of counterintuitive direction.
Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Wasabi Wallet. With Wasabi Wallet, you can receive, send, and store Bitcoin privately. In Wasabi Wallet, your transaction history and wallet balance are completely hidden. Wasabi Wallet is easy to use, all of its privacy features are built in by default, and it works with any amount of Bitcoin. Wasabi users can make CoinJoin transactions together with BTC Pay server users or Trezor Suite users. For BTC Pay server users, they can make payments directly inside of a CoinJoin, and for Trezor Suite users, you can make CoinJoins directly on a hardware wallet. These features result in fee savings and security improvements for both sets of users. So go to wasabiwallet.io today to download the state-of-the-art Bitcoin privacy wallet.
Okay, this is a funny tweet, which I appreciated. You said that the tree of Bitcoin immutability must be watered from time to time with the salty tears of failed, contentious fork proposers and urgent innovators. UASF, never forget. UASF, user activated soft fork, I believe is the acronym there. What, and the kind of like a play on quote there, right? This is what is it? The tree of liberty must occasionally be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants, something like that. Yeah. What was this tweet in regard to, and what I think the UASF is kind of a callback to the Blocksize Wars era. Maybe you could just speak to what this tweet was about. And
Yeah, I mean, so I think before the Blocksize Wars, people were less clear on the kind of who was in charge. Like, could miners make a change to the protocol?
right.
Or could developers make a change to the protocol? And it turned out both of those viewpoints, and people had some mix, right? They were thinking, well, it's a bit of both. But in practice, and the Blocksize War was really about a collection of companies thinking that they would like to bend Bitcoin towards their economic advantage to help their business grow and to make it simple and cheap to have more transactions. And so what it turned out is the market prevailed. So the investors had control. And that's very interesting because it says that, who decides the rules? Well, the buyer. So it's kind of like the labor theory of value fallacy, right? So, if I'm buying gold and I can say that it's really gold, and, some miner digs up some lead and says, here, buy this. I'm like, well, I don't want it. I don't care that it costs you a lot of money to dig up the lead. That's not what I'm buying, right? So it turns out, the buyer decides, and the way that people say Bitcoin is they run a full node, and if their full node says that's not Bitcoin, they don't even notice, right? It just gets dropped. And the miners, of course, very quickly change viewpoints because they lose money fast if they do the wrong thing. And so what actually, the UASF was a situation related to that where some of the miners, I think, maybe not from their own volition, but because other companies tried to lobby them, tried to block the soft fork as a kind of power play or veto, right? So the SegWit soft fork. And so UASF was the users said, no, we want the soft fork and we're going to activate it at this height. And, you better follow along or you'll fork yourself off the network. And, everything fell into place, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's easy, sadly, it seems possible for people to forget lessons of history. And, there's a tendency amongst innovators to want to improve things and change things, which is fine if there's consensus for it. But if there's no consensus for it, then the way Bitcoin works is things stay the same by default. And, when some people see that momentum that Bitcoin is immutable and it will just keep the same way unless everybody opts in, it's typically an opt-in change rate. So you don't have to use it if you don't want it. But also Bitcoin doesn't even tend to want to accept opt-in changes unless everybody likes it.
Right.
And so some people, when faced with that reality, get frustrated and go back to the, well, let's lobby the miners to do it anyway kind of thing, right? And so there was a bit of that stuff brewing. So that was what caused me to sort of connect those two quotes together to say, because I mean, it really is the case that everybody I mean, it's a curious phenomenon. It goes back to what you were saying about truth, right? Which is, Bitcoin doesn't care. It's a mathematical artifact that is completely unsympathetic. So, unlike the Bitcoin Genesis block quote about moral hazard and quantitative easing, you can't plead with the Bitcoin network. It's just going to keep mining blocks. You're like, oh, that was a mistake. I want to undo that transaction. It just keeps mining. Or I want to change Bitcoin. It doesn't care. And the economy of all the investors, they just want to, preserve their spending power and keep the Bitcoin properties. So there've been lots of cases where people, often well-meaning, have come and tried to change Bitcoin in their view for the better. But, if there wasn't widespread consensus for it, they've tended to, kind of get disillusioned, or some people calm down. They say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Right, let's be more patient." And some people just rage quit when that happens. So, it depends on the personalities, but basically, anybody who went up against Bitcoin and tried to fight the momentum lost.
Yeah, that's just such a great point. And again, I told you I've just been getting through that book, The Blocksize War, recently, and it's such a good book. And there was to echo your point, there was no one knew who controlled Bitcoin, or no one knew what would happen basically in the event of a fork, right? And so it reminds me of that old saying that in theory there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. Everyone was kind of looking like, well, is it the miners or is it the developers? But really it was this kind of non-mining node that really kind of chose ultimately.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, we had to go through that it's almost like Bitcoin had to learn about itself, how it really works in a way, at least from the community aspect, the community standpoint. Is that something we're going to go through again? Do you think we go through another Blocksize War? Will it be a privacy war? Will it be something else? Do you see more contentious splits on the horizon for Bitcoin in the near or distant future?
I was hoping not, in the sense that I think everybody, whichever viewpoint they had coming in, learned something from that.
Yeah.
And the fact that we've seen it happen once before and what determinatively resolved it changes the game theory of what will be tried in the future. Because people are going to say, well, we're not going to try that because look how that worked out.
Yeah.
Right. And so before they tried it because they mistakenly thought it would work, they lobbied the miners and that didn't work. So they're probably not going to try that again. Or so you would hope, right? Unless people have short memories and they think, they're going to try it again. So I hope they don't try it again, because it was, both a risky period, at least in the moment, because you weren't 100% sure how it would resolve, but also extremely bullish moment because it showed that Bitcoin's immutability was much more mathematically guaranteed than was understood before. And so you see people that, even joined Bitcoin afterwards, like Michael Saylor, talk enthusiastically about a historical event to say, well, that was really the thing that cemented Bitcoin's mathematical immutability. And so, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, it had to be put to the test, right? Because it's just kind of theoretical up until that point, until you went through the war, kind of to really see what it was made of. And it's such an interesting feature of Bitcoin that up until now, everyone that's tried to game it, right, or bend it or twist it to their own advantage, even large players, well-capitalized players, influential players, like the best of the best that can possibly succeed in that, right? They try to game Bitcoin, they end up getting played. They lose out.
I mean, it was, I commented on this actually it was this conference in a different venue, probably in 2017 or something, on a panel after it resolved, as to what happened. And, my summary was that, if you think about it, that was the perfect storm. It was supposedly by, public position, the majority of the miners by hash rate, a big array of exchanges, payment processors, a number of users. And it was a perfect storm.
They were taking the moral high ground too, right? Trying to save Bitcoin.
Yeah, some of them genuinely thought they were, doing a good thing to improve transaction processing. But despite that, the users, the activist investors want a day. And I mean, I think, some people think, well, maybe it's ambiguous what really happened. But I think what actually happened was that, if you don't trade, if you don't act in the market doesn't see you. So
Right.
just like, and I think the majority of people, because there were futures, right? So you could sell the fork future before it existed and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you could trade this thing. And most people, like before or after, because there were forks that came out of it, were confused and just held both halves passively. Because they didn't know what was going to happen, they didn't know what was going to happen before, or didn't know what happened afterwards. And so they didn't influence the market. And the users were sort of, the intolerant minority. So, they didn't want this to happen. They thought if, this contentious change was pushed through, it would like seriously or maybe permanently damage what Bitcoin could be. And so to them, it was do or die, life or death, right? And so they were kind of like the 300 spawns in the film 300, and they were going for it, right? There's nothing that was going to stand in their way. And the people that wanted to do this for like, business reasons, they wanted it, but not that badly. They didn't want to die for it, right?
Right.
And so, they didn't trade it because they're worried about losing money.
Yeah.
And so, the fork future was 10-1 against this big array of forces, right? Because the guys that really felt strongly about it went for it. Like they sold, everything, right?
Yeah.
And they shorted it and all this kind of stuff. And of course, after it just continued, right? So it was 10-1, now, like 10% of Bitcoin's price, and it's 1%, and now it's like 0.1%. So really, really interesting. But I think it's probably somewhat common, like more common than people suppose, about what decides complex issues in society is that most people don't really know what's going on, or they don't care, and they just wait to see what the result is. Some people care a bit for like an economic reason, but some people really care. And it's people that really care that are going to make the decision because nobody else is, right? They're not deciding, they're observing, or they're mildly care, but not enough. And so the person with conviction. So VJ Boy actually said some quote, like when the, forget the exact words, but basically, we should pull it up and we could cut it
This
in.
is about like the intransigent minority.
Well, it's like when the non-committed meet on the field of battle, but it was such a good thing that...
This is something, that's why you're looking that up. I mean, this is something the author Taleb wrote about. He calls it the minority rule. That we see these obstinate or intransigent minorities often driving big outsized social movements and changes. And so it was interesting to see that occur in Bitcoin as well. Also, while you're looking that up, another just question that kept eating me in the back of my mind as I'm getting through that book was it ever actually about block size?
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's a good question because I think in some ways it was more about bypassing the consensus process than the payload itself. So even if the payload, the feature that was proposed would have been like relatively harmless or like acceptable, the fact that somebody would try to force it on people, like push a change, would undermine the immutability. So here we go. So he said this, I think in 2017, like when the two armies meet in the field of battle, the pragmatists are always going to flee from their adversary with conviction. And so, if you think about markets as, a kind of economic battlefield, I think that's what happened, right? That the Bitcoiners were really, the people that had a strong view that changing, like eroding the change process assurance that be no changes without consensus, thought that was the end of Bitcoin and they really cared about Bitcoin.
Right.
So they were, fighting that thing to the death. And the other people, like most people were not active in the markets, they didn't understand. And the other players were kind of mild, right? They were like, it was a nice to have, or it would help their business. So ultimately, if they could see that there was going to be some kind of, destructive outcome, they kind of backed off, right? They're like, well, okay, if they feel that strongly, we'll give up.
Right. Yeah, this is, reminds me of Sun Tzu in The Art of War. This is something like when you have enemy cornered, like don't press them because they have nothing to lose, right? They'll fight you to the death basically, and that's kind of like the value of Bitcoin maximalists in a way. It's like they're so much life energy invested in this thing, and to preserve the immutability properties of it is to defend what it is.
Right.
So you won't make any compromises effectively.
Right. I mean, I think it's much more than, some savings or something. I think people are really philosophically attached to the, kind of ray of sunshine or the hope for humanity in the future that this technology enables, that they don't want to see it like, destroyed or potentially mortally wounded in its early stages through some like mild corporate interest or something. So they were like, that has to stop. Yeah. And it has to stop right now, because if we destroy this now, society destroys this now, is maybe not repairable. I know we'd lose this hope. So they really meant it, like, don't mess it up.
Yeah, they succeeded. Kind of against all, the odds were against them. It looked like
it did look like, yeah.
And then, so it's a really good book. Good book. Adam, I appreciate you doing this. Great, always great to talk to you. Are you doing more of these events this year? Are you going to like Bitcoin Amsterdam and
yeah, I should be at Bitcoin Amsterdam as well.
Okay, cool. I'll see you there. Where can people find you on the internet?
So Adam Threas on Twitter. So probably the main place. And Blockstream.com for different technologies that Blockstream makes.
Awesome. Thanks again. Thank you. It's fun.